Hey Cobra Kai fans, it's Ian Preston here on Ian Preston, and welcome back to another Cobra Kai video. And I'm just going to be probably standing for this video. And yes, tomorrow, Season 6 Part 1 finally drops. And I wanted to do a little what if video because I've seen Boxiest's videos with what if things have gone differently. And here's what's going to happen. I'm going to do what if this happened, what if this happened, a little last minute thing for before Cobra Kai season 6. Anyway, Boxiest's videos, check out him. He's awesome. Hold on a sec. All right, guys. Anyway, he does like what if things have gone differently, and here's what my what if things gone differently. It'll all begin in season 1. It wouldn't be mostly about Johnny, it'd be a little bit about Daniel. We'll see him and his family, Amanda and Sam and Anthony, and then Miguel and Carmen and his Yaya, they would move, and Miguel's Yaya, they would move kind of near the LaRussos, and they would meet them and have a little dinner. Miguel would not move into an apartment. And they'd have dinner together, they'd get to know them. Miguel would look at Sam, and Sam would look at him, and they'd smile, and yeah, and he would get to know them, and eventually Miguel would have to go get some Pepto-Bismol for his grandma, and apparently Johnny would not be there. Almost Lynn would be there, but Kyler Brooks, Rory, and I think there's a dude that kind of looked like Jamie Foxx almost. He would be there. And then eventually, yes, Miguel would screw them over from buying beer. And then they would get mad. They would pick on him. They would hurt him. And Daniel would be arriving to get something from the convenience store. And then he notices Miguel's getting picked on. He comes up. He tries to stand up for them. They make fun of him. They try to attack him, but he uses the power of Miyagi-Do to save, to defeat them and to defend himself and to save Miguel. And it's official. He comes and heals Miguel, and it'll be just like when Miyagi healed Daniel from Johnny and his gang. And Miguel will ask, "Hey, how come you didn't tell me that you knew karate?" Daniel would say, "Because you never asked." And Daniel would say where he learned it from, and he would mention about Miyagi and how about his Okinawa trip, and um, Miguel would say, "Have you taught anyone?" And he'd be like, "Nope." "Well, would you?" "Depends on what reason." And he asks, "How's revenge?" Or because they just kicked my A, and school's gonna start up and my life's gonna be miserable. And first Daniel would say he can't teach him or something, and Miguel would get mad and say, "Thanks for nothing then." And he's like, "Don't do me any favors. I don't want to see you around my." And then that's when Daniel officially agrees, because he remembered how he was with Miyagi. So he agrees to train Miguel, teach him Miyagi-Do karate, and Miguel would ask, "What kind of belt do you have?" And Daniel would say the same thing. And before Miguel would go, he would say, "Karate here, karate never here." And then he's like, "My stomach?" Something like that. I know for a fact Sam said that when she was little, Daniel would say. And then Miguel would thank him, and then Daniel would tell him, come tomorrow and start early. We'll start our training early. And he would open Miyagi-Do karate for Miguel. He would make Miguel do chores and all. Miguel would eventually have enough. And then Daniel and Miguel will eventually do the training and showing the muscle movement or something and memory of how Miyagi-Do karate is. And they would train on the boat. They'd train a lot. They'd be training, and eventually we would see Johnny Lawrence, but he would be living in a house, and he'd be married to Shannon. So it'd be Johnny and Shannon Lawrence. And Robbie would be with them, Robbie Lawrence. And yes, Johnny would not fail Robbie. He would not fail Robbie, and Robbie would be an only child. And eventually he would be hanging out with Trey and Cruz. And Trey and Cruz, he would hear about Trey and Cruz doing bad stuff, and he wouldn't be so sure about hanging with them. So yes, Daniel and Johnny would see each other, and Johnny would be happy to see him. Daniel would be happy to see them. They would reconcile and do all the reconciliation stuff, and the Lawrence family and the LaRusso family and the Diaz family would have dinner together. And eventually another girl, Tori, would move into the valley. She would come in early in season 1, and Robbie would be interested in Tori. And eventually, when school starts, Miguel would make friends with Demetri and Hawk, or Eli, and eventually he would see Kyler with Sam, and apparently he did not know that Kyler was with Sam. And eventually Daniel asks, "How about we have Kyler over for dinner Friday?" Because Sam eventually tells him, "Hey, Dad, there's this one guy named Kyler. We've been texting." And then, I mean, Daniel. Well, at first, Sam would have her friends over without permission, and like Moon, Yasmin, Kyler, and the others, and eventually, apparently he wouldn't even know that, because eventually Kyler and his buddies would go into the bathroom for a little bit when Daniel come in, and then some buddies come in and say, "Hey, Kyler, we gotta leave." And apparently he had no idea that the guy's name was Kyler when Sam tells him. And then when Kyler comes, he's like, "You? Are you kidding me now? What are you doing with my daughter?" And then she's like, "Dad, come on, you're embarrassing me." I'm like, "This guy's bad news. These are the guys that were beating up. He was one of the guys that beat up that poor Miguel kid." And I'm like, "Hey, don't." He's like, "What? I wouldn't do such a thing to a kid. Hey, don't play dumb." And then eventually he's like, "Wait, is this true, Kyler?" Sam would ask. Like, "No." And he would be in touch with Miguel would be in touch with Nestor, the convenience store owner, and he would send security footage, and Sam would see the video, Amanda would see the video, Anthony would be at a sleepover, and then Daniel would kick Kyler out. And yes, and then eventually, then at school, Kyler tries to do something to Sam. Miguel stands up for her, and then he uses the power of Miyagi-Do to defeat Kyler, Brooks, Rory, and the Jamie Foxx looking kid. And then eventually, Johnny and Daniel agree to team up, and they team up, and they would be teaching karate, and then they get Demetri and Eli to join in. They wouldn't make fun of Eli though, but eventually Eli would said he wants to be more than just himself, so he changes his hair and he becomes Hawk. And yes, he falls in love with Moon, and apparently Yasmin does not do anything mean to Aisha. um apparently Aisha learns karate and kicks butt. And then, well, actually, at first, yes, Yasmin would be mean to Aisha. There would be Halloween dance. Kyler would not mess with Sam and Miguel because he became an outcast after getting beat up by Miguel. But Yaz would make fun of Aisha, though she would do the same. She would do that thing to Aisha, and then eventually Aisha learns karate, and then they have a party, another party, and then Aisha embarrasses Yasmin in front of everybody to get back after. But Moon would still apologize um, to Aisha, and the tournament would still go on, and Miguel would still win. And Cobra Kai, Johnny would not open Cobra Kai at this in this timeline. So yeah, and eventually Sam and Miguel would go on a date. Robbie and Tori would go on a date. And yes, Robbie would eventually have to defend himself and fight Trey and Cruz and stop being friends with them. And eventually, and then there's this strip mall, and apparently two guys are shaking hands, and then a Cobra is put up there, Cobra Kai, and then it shows John Kreese saying the real story is about to begin. So he's the one that opens Cobra Kai, and he gets students to come in, and then eventually some students leave because they hear about what Cobra Kai is, and then eventually Kyler hears about it. He joins Cobra Kai, and then eventually, by the way, Robbie and Miguel and Tori and Sam, they do not become enemies in this timeline. Eventually, summer has its ups and downs. Eventually, the school fight happens. Kyler's in the school fight too, and he's the one to injure Miguel. And then the police see him immediately, and they arrest Kyler immediately. Kyler gets arrested immediately and goes to juvie, gets picked on by Sean, and then eventually Kreese visits Kyler, and then Kyler starts learning Cobra Kai and gets into fights in juvie, and earns his respects from Sean Payne. And Miguel wakes up. He Daniel and Johnny and Robbie, Sam and Tori help him get back on his feet, and then eventually they have a house fight at the Cobra Kai around Christmas time. I mean, at the LaRusso house. And yes, some of these events would stay the same, only people would be on different sides. They would defeat Cobra Kai easily. Kyler would get out of juvie. the tournament would be back on, and eventually Kreese and Daniel and Johnny would get into a fight. We would still see young Kreese flashbacks. Kreese would try to get Terry Silver, and he would recruit Terry Silver. And yes, Daniel would still go to Okinawa eventually because trying to save his business from Tom Cole. And yes, he would run into Kamiko and make amends with Chosen. And Yuna would save his business, Daniel's business. And eventually around school time, Kenny would get picked on by Anthony, and then eventually he would get tricked into going to the park by Anthony, and then eventually we see Robbie and Miguel walking in the park, and they see all this, and then they defend themselves from Anthony's friends, and then eventually they tell Daniel about the whole thing, and then make sure Kenny's okay, and then convince Kenny to join Miyagi-Do, and the show would not be called Cobra Kai. It'd be called Miyagi-Do. and um, Daniel would eventually punish Anthony. Then he would force him to apologize to Kenny, and Kenny would forgive him. And they would join Miyagi-Do together and learn Miyagi-Do. And then eventually they would both get picked on by Zach, Slade, and Marcus. And then they'd have to defend themselves. They'd get in trouble, but then Anthony and Kenny would get off the hook and say, "We got you three good," to Zach, Slade, and Marcus, because they're the ones that get suspended. Prom night would still happen, and nothing bad would go on. The tournament would still go on, and of course, Terry Silver would end up paying the ref to have someone cheat. I think he'd have Piper cheat. And yes, Moon and Piper would not date because Hawk and Moon would never break up because Hawk would never become bad. And they would still have a soccer fight, though, eventually. But Miyagi-Do would get off the hook. Cobra Kai would get in detention. Demetri would get his arm broken by one of the Cobras, but not Hawk, because some of them would get outnumbered during the arcade fight. That's season 3. I'm kind of a little mixed up. And eventually, Miguel would want to leave to go find his real dad. Yes, he would pull muscle pull during the tournament, and he would leave to go find his dad. Johnny and Robbie would still go and get him in Mexico. Chosen would come to the U.S. to help Daniel take down Cobra Kai. And yes, mostly the season 5 events would stay the same. Only some people would be friends, some people would be enemies. And yes, Amanda would still leave Daniel, and Jessica would still tell Daniel Amanda about Terry Silver. They would still have the bar fight with Elizabeth Ann Rooney. And when Robbie and Johnny go to Mexico, Johnny kisses his wife Shannon goodbye, and Shannon wouldn't leave eventually when they get back because, again, Johnny and Shannon are married, but Shannon is actually expecting another kid eventually, and then Johnny has to do job searching because Shannon's gonna have a kid and they don't know the gender though, and eventually the season 5 events just carry on and on with the Sekai Taikai qualification, and Devin would not join Cobra Kai in this. She would still stay in Miyagi-Do, and then eventually they make the plan to expose Silver. They successfully do it. Daniel takes down Silver, and Johnny and Mike and Chosen defeat the evil senseis, and then Terry Silver gets arrested, and most of those events stay the same. And then Kreese, after the tournament, All Valley tournament, Kreese would still be betrayed by Terry Silver, and eventually Silver would get out of jail. Kreese would get out of jail once Silver gets arrested. And then this show would be called Miyagi-Do instead of Cobra Kai. And those are my what if this would happen or that would happen. And yeah, but anyway, that's pretty much all I got for you guys. Thank you guys for watching. Hit that subscribe button, turn on the notification bell. Check out Ian Preston reviews. Link will be in the description. And I'll see you guys in the next video. And remember, Cobra Kai never dies.